Week 15 of the fantasy football season. Here's the top 36 wide receivers I'm ranking this week. So with the playoffs starting this week, obviously a crucial week for fantasy owners. First receiver, Puka Nacua of the Los Angeles Rams. He was slumping for a little bit, but then last week a breakout game once again it was for Nacua. 7 catches, 167 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So this week a good matchup versus the Detroit Lions, a defense that's been hit or miss this season. And last week we saw the Cowboys move the football up and down the field versus, I think, Nacua once again goes out there as a big game. Number 2, Jackson Smith-Njigba of the Seattle Seahawks. A JSN, one bad game, bounced back last week. 2 touchdowns in that one, easily at the Atlanta Falcons. And this week a good matchup, Indianapolis Colts coming in. I think they can have a lot of possessions in this game in Seattle with this Colt offense. I don't know who's going to play quarterback and move the football for them. So I think JSN, once again, will have a big game. Number 3, Jamar Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. Jamar Chase, it's been a great season for him once again. This week a good matchup versus the Baltimore Ravens, a team where he's had a lot of success throughout his NFL career. And with Burrow back in the lineup, I know last week wasn't a great game for Chase, but Higgins looks like he's going to be out, where he's in concussion protocol once again. So that's even more targets for Chase this week. Number 4, Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions. So one of the tougher guys in all the NFL. Last week a lot of people thought he wasn't going to give it a go, and he did with St. Brown, so he didn't miss a game with that ankle sprain. He's back this week in another big game with their playoff hopes on the line at the ramp. This is going to be a high-scoring game between these two teams, and St. Brown, once again this season, he's been one of the best receivers in the league. Number 5, Rashee Rice of the Kansas City Chiefs. So this offense was shut down last week of the Kansas City Chiefs in a very tough matchup versus the Houston Texans, one of the best defenses in the league. But this week a better matchup versus the Chargers. We saw last week A.J. Brown go over 100 yards in that ball game versus defense, and I think Rice will get back on track. Number 6, CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys. So Lamb, he was on his way to probably a 200-yard game last week before he went out with concussion, finishing with 6 catches, 121 yards, having a big game at the Detroit Lions. So right now, progressing well. We'll see what the practice reports say when they come out this week. Well, I think CeeDee Lamb is going to give it a go with that extra few days of rest where they played last Thursday and not playing until Sunday night this week. And it's a pretty decent matchup versus Minnesota. Number 7, Nico Collins of the Houston Texans. So this week, a great matchup versus the Arizona Cardinals, a defense that can't stop anyone. Like I said, we just saw Nacua go for 167 and 2 touchdowns on this defense. And Collins last week got off to a hot start, 100 yards in the first half. And then second half, he slowed down a little bit. But once again this year, he's been one of the better wide receivers in fantasy football. Number 8, A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles. Ever since he complained and took it public that he's got to get the football and they got to get it to him more. This Eagle team's 1-3, but Brown's putting up monster numbers. He's back to an elite level in fantasy football, and this week it's a great matchup versus the Vegas Raiders, a defense that's one of the worst in the league. So A.J. Brown, he's happy now. He's getting targeted, and I think he's just worried about getting his touches and getting his touchdowns instead of this team winning the way it's looking right now. Number 9, George Pickens of the Dallas Cowboys. What a breakout season it's been for George Pickens in his first year in a contract year with this Dallas Cowboy team. Last week, a lot of people thought he didn't hustle and make some of the plays he usually does as George Pickens. So this week, I think he's going to bounce back. He's going to try to prove people wrong. Now, last week, he wasn't dogging it. And this week, it's a pretty good matchup versus the Minnesota Vikings in a potential game where Dallas, we know they're putting up 30, 35 points a game this season, most ball games. Number 10, Davante Adams of the Los Angeles Rams. So last week was the Puka Nacua show, but I think this week, Adams, he gets it back going for this Los Angeles Ram team. This week, a good matchup. Detroit coming in where Dallas moved the football up and down the field versus them. And like I said, Adams leading the league in touchdowns at the receiver position as well with 14. Number 11, Michael Wilson of the Arizona Cardinals. So Michael Wilson, when Marvin Harrison Jr. don't play, he's putting up huge numbers, and we'll see if Marvin plays in this one. Arizona's way out of it. I don't think there's a need to rush Marvin Harrison back where he came back for a game. Then last week he missed, obviously, with the heel injury. And Michael Wilson, when he's not in the lineup, Marvin Harrison, he's putting up elite numbers, over 25 fantasy points per game in 3 games where he's been the number 1 wide receiver. Even in a tough matchup at Houston, if Marvin's out, he's going to have a big game once again, most likely, going off track record. Number 12, Tator McMillan of the Carolina Panthers. This week, a good matchup at the New Orleans Saints. Carolina coming off bye, and McMillan, even in ball games where he doesn't get a lot of catches and yards, he's still finding the end zone and putting up fantasy points. So this week, I've said this in a lot of videos, players coming off bye, especially rookies, get more into the playbook, and I think this week they're going to target him a lot in this one. 13, Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins. He's been the number one wide receiver in the majority of the season ever since Tyreek Hill went down with that big injury, obviously. So this week, a decent matchup at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Last week, we saw Zay Flowers go out there with a big game over 120 yards. And I think Waddle, this week on Monday night, he's going to get his targets. He's going to make some plays in this game. And like I said, he's been a solid option since Hills went out for the season early in the year. Number 14, Chris Olave of the New Orleans Saints. So last week was a bad game for Olave. That's one of them. You just forget about it, move on to the next week. And this week, not a great matchup versus Carolina, where their defense has actually been good over the last few weeks, and they're coming off by. But Olave, the number one option in this passing game. This could be a trailing game script where they got to chase points, even though last week they did upset Tampa Bay in Tampa Bay. And I think Chris Olave bounces back this week, has a decent game. 15, Zay Flowers to the Baltimore Ravens. So last week he had one of his best games of the season. Zay Flowers going over 120 yards. And I've said this all season long, he's the number one option in the passing game for Lamar Jackson in this Raven team. But this team's obviously struggling mightily offensively, especially Jackson over the last month of the season. But this week at Cincinnati, I think they could get right a little bit, and Zay Flowers will be a big part of it. 16, Christian Watson of the Green Bay Packers. He's been moving up the rankings very quickly over the last 6 weeks since he's been back in the lineup. Is Christian Watson, and he's easily the number one wide receiver for this Packer team. I know Jaden Reed returned last week, but Christian Watson has the game-breaking ability. We saw it a few seasons ago when he was healthy, where he had like 8 touchdowns in a 5-game span. So now he's healthy, he's playing good football. Him and Love are locked in. I know it's a tough matchup this week at Denver, but we've seen wide receivers go out there this season and have pretty good ball games versus the Denver Broncos, even with Patrick Surtain covering number 17, Wan'Dale Robinson of the New York Giants. So Wan'Dale Robinson, it's been a solid year for him, and believe it or not, he's got similar stats to Justin Jefferson on the season, where Robinson, he was undrafted in most fantasy leagues. So Jackson Dart and Robinson have a good rapport. This week it's a good matchup with the Commanders coming in, and Wan'Dale has been a good PPR player underneath the route running, yard after catch ability, and this week I like him in a good matchup. 18, Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings. So I think something's got to give. This week could be a good week for Justin Jefferson. This Cowboys secondary isn't that good, and we saw the rookie Chevrolet get obviously exposed last week trying to cover Jameson Williams and St. Brown, and Jared Goff in this line offense just kept picking on him, where we saw those guys have big games. So this week at Dallas, this could be a high-scoring game possibly, and I think Jefferson as a wide receiver too. And I think Jefferson, something's got to give, and we'll see this week if it's the breakout week finally for Justin Jefferson. 19, Jacoby Myers of the Jacksonville Jaguars. It's been a good trade deadline acquisition for this Jaguar team, and they're playing great football. They're in first. Myers and Lawrence have been locked in, and now Myers, when you see, obviously he's motivated to go out there and play and make plays. He's putting up numbers where the whole season he wanted out of Vegas, and he just didn't get anything going. So this week with a good matchup versus the Jets, I think Myers could go out there once again and have a game. 20, Jameson Williams of the Detroit Lions. So J-Mo, ever since Dan Campbell's taken over the play calls, he's putting up similar numbers like he did last season. Williams, he's more than a one-trick pony. He's shown as well over the last few weeks where he's making plays and not just going deep and burning a secondary. So this week in a high-scoring game indoors at the Rams, I think Williams once again could be a nice receiver too for owners. 21, Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So there's a good shot he returns in this game as Mike Evans on Thursday Night Football. And we know he broke the collarbone early in the season on the Monday Night Ball game is Mike Evans. But now they add him to the lineup, and they need another guy that goes out there and makes plays as this Tampa Bay Buc team. So Mike Evans, I think he'll be close to 100% in this ball game. Like I said, he's been out for two and a half months now for this Tampa Bay Buc team, and it's a good game to get back into action with the Falcons coming in. 22, Juwan Jennings of the San Francisco 49ers. It's been a great year for Jennings, and it was a good time to have the bye for this 49er team, where Jennings has been dealing with multiple injuries, ankle injuries, shoulder, some fractured ribs he's had this season as well. So this week in a good matchup with Tennessee coming in, I think Jennings once again will go out there and have a good game, and we know him and Brock Purdy have a great rapport. 23, Devonta Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles. So this week a good matchup versus the Vegas Raiders. Last week I thought this Eagle offense, these guys still put up some decent fantasy games, even though Jalen Hurts was a disaster, throwing 4 interceptions in that ball game at the Los Angeles Chargers. So I think Devonta Smith, it wouldn't be surprising if he's good for a deep ball touchdown in this one versus a bad Raiders secondary. 24, Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders. So to me, I think Marcus Mariota is going to start in this game. There's no reason for Jaden Daniels to go out there and risk himself getting re-injured, where last week East gave the big injury once again on that elbow after he was trying to make a tackle and dove and couldn't make the tackle. So Terry McLaurin, he's had some good games with Mariota this season, and McLaurin's finally starting to get his legs under him, where he's missed majority of the season with a quad injury. So this week at the Giants, I think he's a solid option. 25, Stephon Diggs of the New England Patriots. So Diggs, it's been a every other week type of thing with Stephon Diggs, and also with this offense, Drake May's the quarterback that spreads it out, and every week it's someone different going out there and putting up numbers. But this week, another revenge game here for Stephon Diggs. We saw it early in the season on Monday night where the Patriots went in there and they upset the Buffalo Bills, and Stephon Diggs had his best game of the season, in my opinion. Crisp route running, big yard after catch plays, and big key third down plays. So this week with Buffalo coming in, and you know the juices are flowing versus one of his former teams where it was a bad falling out, I think Diggs goes out there and once again has a good performance. 26, Lab McConkey of the Los Angeles Chargers. So this week with a tough matchup at Kansas City and Justin Herbert not 100%. Where we saw it last week where he was hesitant a little, even though we know it's the non-throwing hand of Justin Herbert. And it was a tough matchup versus the Eagles where they got a great defense and he was sacked multiple times. But obviously McConkey to me is easily the number one option in this passing game. And after a bad game last week, I think he'll bounce back. Not have a great game, but still a solid 3-receiver flex option. 27, Cortland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. So Cortland Sutton, it's been an up and down season for him. This is a run-first offense, and they win these games running the football and relying on their defense to go out there and make plays for the majority. And also, Bo Nix, he runs the football a decent amount of times and spreads it out. So Cortland Sutton, it's a tough matchup versus the Packers, one of the better defenses coming in, and we just know his ceiling isn't that high week after week. 28, Emeka Egbuka of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Egbuka last week, he could have caught a game-winning touchdown late in that one, but he had one go through his hands. I know it was a little bit high, but Egbuka's definitely had some drop problems this season in his rookie year, and I think he's hitting the rookie wall a little bit. So now with Mike Evans back in the lineup, that's some targets that are going to be taken away from Egbuka. Chris Godwin's been healthier over the last couple weeks, taking targets away. And this week versus Atlanta, it could be a game they're up early in that one, and then second half they're running it out a lot. So I think Egbuka's ceiling is capped a little now with Mike Evans back in the lineup. 29, DK Metcalf of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So he had a monster game finally last week, 7 catches, 148 yards at the Baltimore Ravens. But I doubt once again he goes out there and does that. He's DK Metcalf. And also he's not 100%, where he was in the hospital after that game with stomach issue, taking some big hits. I know this week it is a good matchup on paper versus the Dolphins, but this Dolphin defense, even though that it's bad, I just don't have confidence week in and week out Metcalf could go out there and put up elite numbers like he did last week. 30, Michael Pittman of the Indianapolis Colts. So this Colt offense, if it's going to be Rypien, Leonard, or Phillip Rivers, I have no confidence really that Pittman's going to get peppered with targets all day long and have a high ceiling, especially in a matchup at Seattle. But Pittman is the number one option in this passing game, him and Tyler Warren. And this week at Seattle, there's going to be a lot of garbage time, and I think he'll work his way into some decency. 31, Brian Thomas Jr. of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So his ceiling's been low all season long. He's had drop problems, injury problems as well. Last week he did have 3 catches, 87 yards in that one. But like I said, the targets haven't been there. Jacoby Myers has been playing way better football than him. And even Parker Washington at times. And we know Brenton Strange has been solid at the tight end position. So this week, even in a good matchup versus the New York Jets, I don't think his ceiling's high as well. 32, Deebo Samuel of the Washington Commanders. Early in the season, he was putting up nice numbers with Deebo Samuel, but this offensive line has lost some guys this season. We know Jaden Daniels has been in and out of the lineup, and Marcus Mariota, I thought he's been filling in pretty well for this Commander team, but obviously Deebo Samuel, he hasn't been 100% as well this season, where he's playing through injury, and I think his better days are behind him. So this week, even in a good matchup on paper at the Giants, I don't see him doing much. 33, Khalil Shakir of the Buffalo Bills. He's number one option in this passing game, but we know this offense is Josh Allen spreading that football out, Josh Allen running the football a lot, and also James Cook, one of the more elite running backs in the league. So Khalil Shakir, he's a wide receiver that he's not really a true number one. He's more of a slot guy underneath, route runner, and a guy who'll make plays, but weekly, you just can't predict what he's going to do. So this week in a matchup at New England, I still think he's a decent flex option. 34, Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Atlanta coming in. We know their defense can't stop anyone, but now with Mike Evans back in there and this offense back to 100% capacity, someone's going to take a hit numbers-wise, and I think it's going to be Ibuka. And also as well, we know Chris Godwin ain't 100%, but this week versus Atlanta, he still cracks this top 36. 35, Luther Burden of the Chicago Bears. So to me, Roma Dunze, I think he's going to be out once again. He's week to week with the foot injury is Roma Dunze. And this week, it's not a great matchup versus Cleveland, where I think Luther Burden, a majority of the game, might have Denzel Ward on him in this one. But Luther Burden, they've been using him in different formations. They've been using him in some end-around plays as well as a Chicago Bear team. And DJ Moore's been a non-factor this season. So Burden, with Odunze out once again, I still think could go out there and get you anywhere from 7 to 10 fantasy points. And the 36th and final receiver, Jordan Addison of the Minnesota Vikings. Addison, I like the matchup with the Cowboys. I think this Cowboys secondary isn't good, even though the defense has definitely been better since they made deals at the deadline. But last week we saw Chevel, the rookie, get picked on in that game. And I think J.J. McCarthy, if he's been studying his tape, he'll figure that out. And Addison could have Chevel on him a couple times in this game and make some plays at the Cowboys. That's the top 36 wide receivers I'm ranking for Week 15 of the fantasy football season.